We've got to ask, what the heck happened last night? I mean, most people thought the coalition would lose, but no one imagined they would lose so badly.
With 89% of the vote counted, Labor has won 86 seats, the coalition 37. Here was part of Anthony Albanese's victory speech last night.
Australians have chosen a majority Labor government. A short time ago, I spoke with Peter Dutton, who has, of course, conceded defeat. And I thanked him. No. What we do in Australia is we treat people with respect. Whether you belong to a culture that has known and cared for this great continent for 65,000 years, or you have chosen our nation as your home and enriched our society with your contribution, we are all Australians.
It's absolutely astonishing to me that after the last 3 years, and no one would say the country's going particularly well, Anthony Albanese wins the election with the third highest two-party preferred vote in history, second only to Harold Holt in, I think it was 1966, and Malcolm Fraser in 1975. I'm keen to ask Bronwyn Bishop a little later because she will tell you she never thought of Anthony Albanese as much of a leader, and yet he's destined to go down as, get this, one of the great Labor leaders of all time.
My goodness.
But as for that victory speech, I mean, can you believe the gaslighting when he's saying, you know what, commiserations to Peter Dutton, and someone in the crowd obviously jeers Peter Dutton, and Anthony Albanese's all, no, we don't do that. We show respect. Are you kidding me? They've spent the past number of months portraying Peter Dutton as aggro, more aggro than Cartoon Connection, as a mini Trump. They smeared him for buying shares during COVID. They implied that he was going to cut Medicare and slash and didn't care. They have been disrespecting Peter Dutton the entire way, but now Anthony Albanese is gaslighting us just as he has right through this campaign, that, oh no, he's all about respect and so on and so forth. And then that last comment there about whether you're part of a culture that's been here 65,000 years or whether you're a newly arrived immigrant. Well, that's wonderful. We obviously value Indigenous people and newly arrived immigrants, but there's a huge part of the electorate he failed to mention there, and that's the overwhelming majority of people who are just normal Aussies. They're not Indigenous, they're not an immigrant. They've just, you know, been born here along with their family before them, who are just waiting for when does someone stand up for just normal middle Australians rather than dividing to every diversity group.
Well, I think this is a preview, maybe, of what's to come. A preview of the next 3 years, more division. Look, this should have been a referendum on Anthony Albanese, because when you think about it, this really was the Liberals to win. They should have won this, right? They should have won this.
They were on track.
Because they were on track to win this. Anthony Albanese is the worst Prime Minister. The guy is a complete dud. He is totally uninspiring at every single level. In fact, last night in that victory speech was probably the most inspiring I've ever heard him speak in the last 3 years. But let's paint a picture of what our country looks like, James. We're in the cost of living crisis. There's a housing crisis. We've had a record number of immigrants come here. More than 1.1 million have come here under Anthony Albanese's Big Australia policy. Border security is in shambles. You've got China doing live fire drills off this country, and nobody seems to know in the Labor Party what's going on. Anti-Semitism, power bills going through the roof. You have got no plans to keep the lights on in this country, and yet the last 3 years alone should have been enough to toss this guy out. It should have been a slam dunk, and look at what has happened. I also think that the Liberals failed to monopolise on that momentum that they saw after the Voice referendum, because Anthony Albanese lost steam after that. He really lost steam after that.
He was clearly rattled.
He was rattled. He was rattled after that. So something has gone wrong, but I just feel like last night was a preview into the future, because have a listen to what Anthony Albanese also said, acknowledging the Indigenous elders. Have a look at this.
And I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging today and every day.
That was pretty much the first thing Anthony Albanese said in his victory speech, which was pretty much a middle finger to 60% of Australians who voted no at the referendum. And whatever your position on acknowledgement of country, for him to say today and every day is a clear message that he is going to double down on all of his policies now.
Yeah.
Whatever percentage they got in primary vote, it was like 35% or whatever, they'll take that as a mandate to do as they want with this country. And the vote proved you can lie, you can gaslight, you can demonise your opponent, and guess what, Danica? They won the election.
Correct.
So they will double down, get ready for more of the same and worse over the next 3 years.
The conviction in Anthony Albanese's voice when he gave that acknowledgement, again, was probably the most conviction I've heard from him in the last 3 years. Penny Wong hinted at a Voice 2.0 earlier in the week. I think it's safe to say that based on that line in itself, Anthony Albanese is red hot to go. He's ready to do something like this again. Look, I just find it extraordinary that Labor ran so many scare campaigns throughout this, so many scare campaigns.
Yep.
Mediscare was a big con from the very beginning because the Liberals actually pledged to do better when it came to Medicare, and yet the public still agreed. The public still voted for Labor, and I'm very curious to break this down. We've got a full guest list tonight, but I think half of the problem here was that voters did not like Anthony Albanese. That was very clear. But on the other end, they didn't know who Peter Dutton was. And you would think, James, by 5 weeks into the campaign, 3 years into three years into Anthony Albanese's cycle, they should have known who Peter Dutton was by now.
We'll go further than that. Forget 5 weeks into the campaign or 3 years as opposition leader or whatever. He's been in Parliament for a couple of decades.
Well, he has, yeah, and I think it's 19
not a failure
years.
on the part of the public. It's a failure on the part of the Liberal Party to sell Peter Dutton.
Well, this is how Channel 9 explained what happened last night, and have a listen to the concession speech.
This is a big one. Peter Dutton, the leader of the opposition, a former Home Affairs Minister, Health Minister, Defence Minister, someone who served the country in the Parliament for many years.
20 years, Charles.
Yep, fought off tight elections. He once said there was water lapping at the door. I think that's what he's feeling right now.
Oh.
His hero politically is John Howard, and like John Howard before him, he has lost his seat as leader of the Liberal Party. And a genuine thank you to your service, Peter Dutton, but also into the drink. 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
throw the ball.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Remarkable.
And off he goes. And that pretty much sums up the night for the Coalition.
Now, we didn't do well enough during this campaign. That much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that.
Look, he has to accept full responsibility, James, and we're going to unpack what we think went wrong here. He is the face of this party. He has to accept full responsibility. But the reality is that Australians didn't know who Peter Dutton was. The sell was bad from the very beginning because they should have known who he was.
What about the Channel 9 coverage, though?
It was like a clown show.
The country is in a real mess. This was an incredibly important election. And, I mean, good on Channel 9, do whatever you want. But I think when you're portraying an election as important as this one, almost in a game show kind of style.
It's terrible.
I mean, no wonder the electorate seemed to be pretty confused about what's what or misinformed.
Correct.
When you're getting things treated like that. I just thought that
Well, they made it out to be a joke, like it was a joke. I mean, this is serious. It's the future of the country. And obviously, James, now the Coalition's postmortem begins. And, look, it's not pretty. It's very clear that many mistakes were made.
Well, sure. How does Peter Dutton go from, leader to loser in the space of just a few months?
A woman is defined as an adult female, and that's the definition. That Australia must embrace zero-emission, next-generation nuclear technologies as part of our energy mix. We should stand behind one flag united. So would we reinstate a requirement for councils to hold citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day? You bet. It'll be done in the first 100 days.
Do you trust him, was the question?
Well, we trust the United States, and I don't know the President. I've not met him. The Prime Minister obviously has been able to.
So you're not willing to say you trust Donald Trump?
I don't know Donald Trump is my point.
What is your definition of a woman?
Well, that's a matter obviously that's been before the British courts. I haven't seen the detail of the case, and it's not something that I think is front of minds at this election. For most Australians, nuclear power starting in 2035 to 37 is probably just too far away to contemplate. It's not been a huge issue at this election, either for or against.
So you can see there were two very contrasting Peter Duttons. The one at the start was a very strong, decisive, to the point Peter Dutton, no nonsense. But as the campaign went on, the rhetoric changed. I believe it was from that moment, it was in the second debate when he was asked, do you trust Donald Trump? And he said, I've never met Donald Trump. That was when it started going downhill. He was then asked, what is a woman? Couldn't answer that. And then on radio a couple of days ago, he was asked about the nuclear campaign and he said, well, we haven't discussed it much, this campaign, because it's further down the track. Well, hang on a second. Nuclear was a key policy, James, for the coalition, a key policy from the very, very beginning. They should have actually gone the way of Trump and been more straightforward, been more direct, because the problem is now there was no clear policy agenda. There was no clear policy between Labor and the Liberal Party, and it became this policy on the run almost. It was like thought bubbles. And when you think about it, Tony Abbott had this one clear line, right? Stop the boats.
Yep.
That was a clear line. That's what stuck in voters' minds. What did Peter Dutton have?
Yeah, it was confusing.
It was confusing. It was very, very wish-washy. And you can also combine that with a very left-wing media. The media asked Peter Dutton a raft of really dumb questions. Why not take the media head on? Take them on like Donald Trump did. Be brave, be bold.
Well, Peter Dutton seemed to go from trying to win the election to trying not to lose the election. And from being quite bold at times, he went to being incredibly cautious, anxious not to be caught out. I mean, you mentioned women's rights. That Supreme Court ruling in the UK that women should be defined by biology and therefore women's rights should be premium in sport, in private spaces, that was a gift to the coalition. And yet he didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot barge pole. They were doing everything they could to avoid associating themselves with Donald Trump. And whether you like Trump or not, a lot of Trump's policies were similar to the coalition's. Doge, but then they stopped mentioning Senator Price dealing with government waste. Woke school curriculums, they talked about that. And then when asked what were they going to do, Peter Dutton said, oh, we don't have any plans. So these were policy thought bubbles. They were ideas that then it seemed they became too afraid to expand on them. They retreated, and so they were left with get Australia back on track, which begs the question, back on track to what? And your guess is as good as mine as to what they ultimately stood for, aside from nuclear power in about 10 years from now.
Correct. But the problem is that was a key policy. I mean, nuclear is a proven resource in places like the US and the UK. Why not just go with it? Go full on with it, as opposed to at the very end say, actually, no, what, we didn't talk about it because, well, it was a thought bubble down the road. I just thought it was really poor. And you mentioned Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price as well. She was very brutal last night in her description of what happened. This is what she said.
We could have gone harder. We absolutely could have gone harder. We could have gone harder also on calling out the Prime Minister and his lies. And I think perhaps we could have been stronger in terms of what we were offering the Australian people, perhaps brought out some of our policies earlier as well and got that message across.
Peter Dutton tonight has lost his seat. With your embrace of Donald Trump, Make Australia Great Again, are you part of the reason for that loss?
Oh, that's a big call, don't you think? I mean, you sling enough mud in an election, it sticks. And we did see a Prime Minister who absolutely misled the Australian people all the way through and was rarely called out for his conduct, and I think that's absolutely deceitful.
But Jacinta, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about this seriously. At a time when Donald Trump was sending shockwaves around the world,
I'm talking about it seriously.
It's not a smear campaign. I just want you to address it seriously, Jacinta. At the time that Donald Trump was sending shockwaves around the world, disturbing. So if you don't think that I'm addressing this seriously,
I am addressing this deadly seriously, in that if you sling enough mud, it will stick. And absolutely, Labor, certainly the media, slung enough mud in terms of this particular issue